In the last days of October 1957, Chevrolet sent the first Impala out to its dealers. It sat on a frame Chevrolet had never used, and it wore 6 taillights instead of 4. More than a year earlier, General Motors designers had already decided the body would live 1 model year and then be thrown away. They decided it in the summer of 1956 after driving out to a chain-link fence. Harley Earl, who had run styling at General Motors since the 20s, was in Europe while they did it. Chevrolet in the middle of the 1950s was the best-selling car brand in America, and it was quietly losing a customer. For 30 years, the brand had sold on price, which worked on a country that wanted transport. By 1956, the man walking through the showroom had more money than that, and he was taking it up the ladder to something with more badge on it. Ed Cole took over as Chevrolet's general manager that year after running the division's engineering. That department had grown from about 850 people to 2,900 under him, and it had put the small block V8 into production in roughly 15 weeks. Cole's stated goal for what came next was a prestige car within the reach of the average American citizen. Ford was watching the same man walk up the same ladder and reached for a much bigger answer. It built him a whole new brand with a dealer network of its own and called it the Edsel. Cole's answer cost Chevrolet a fraction of that. It was a trim level sold through dealers Chevrolet already had, wearing a name that had been standing in public for the best part of 2 years while almost nobody paid it any attention. That name first appeared on the 19th of January 1956 at the Waldorf Astoria in New York, where General Motors opened its Motorama show. On the stand was a fiberglass 5-seater with a brushed stainless steel roof and a Corvette 5.8 under the hood, styled by Carl Renner and Bob Cadaret. It was called the Corvette Impala. The name comes from an antelope in southern Africa, and nobody in the surviving record can be credited with choosing it. Not quite 2 years later, it went on a production car, and it went on cautiously. Impala for 1958 was the top of the Bel Air series rather than a car in its own right, and it came in 2 body styles and no others: a sport coupe hardtop and a convertible. If you wanted the 6 taillights and the roofline that went with them, you bought a 2-door. The car itself was drawn in the Chevrolet studio under Claire McKeechan, who had run it since 1951 and had already given the company the Tri-5 cars. McKeechan worked for Harley Earl, along with everyone else who drew a General Motors car. Earl had run styling at General Motors since the 20s, and every designer who drew a General Motors car worked for him. That summer, McKeechan's studio was also working on the 1959 cars under Earl's authority, like everything else in the building. When Earl came back from Europe, that program was gone from the walls. His own staff had thrown it out and started a different one while he was abroad, and he found out by walking into the studio and looking at the walls. What Earl did next settled what every General Motors car would look like in 1959, and it is the reason the Impala body got 12 months. Chuck Jordan was 28 years old and worked in General Motors styling. In the summer of 1956, he drove out to a holding lot near Chrysler's Plymouth plant, where finished cars sat waiting, while the public was still not allowed to know what they looked like. He stood at the chain-link fence and looked through it. Describing it years afterwards, he said, "I'm looking through the fence and all I could see were fins, fins, fins." What he was looking at was Chrysler's 1957 range, drawn under Virgil Exner. They sat lower than anything General Motors had coming, and the fins standing off the back of them were on a scale nobody at General Motors had drawn. Jordan drove back, knowing that the cars his own company was about to launch would look old in a showroom window. He told Bill Mitchell, who was Earl's second in command. Mitchell put the senior designers into cars and drove them out to the same fence so they could stand at the wire and see it for themselves. Jordan's account is the only detailed one anybody has, and in it, he says they started a second design that afternoon, while Earl was away on a trip, and that Mitchell had guts. Nothing about that was authorized. The existing 1959 program was drawn and sitting in the studios, and from that afternoon, the studio was drawing something else instead, with nobody senior enough in the building to tell it that it could. Earl was touring the European motor shows while it happened. Most retellings put the reaction in showrooms after the 1957 Chryslers went on sale. It had already happened by then, in a gravel lot, in front of cars with no price on them yet. The other version has executives taking a decision, which turns a mutiny into a memo. the styling staff started the work on its own initiative, and the approval caught up later. The 1958 cars were a different matter. They were too far along to change. The tooling was ordered and the panels were drawn. A launch date already sat on a calendar for the autumn of 1957, and there was no version of that calendar in which General Motors could stop them. So it built them, knowing the whole time that the bodies would be scrapped after one season. It built them without cutting anything. The condemned car got a new frame and a new big block engine. It also got an option so fragile that almost none of them still work. Every Chevrolet up to 1957 sat on a ladder frame, two long rails running front to back with cross members between them. For 1958, the division threw that out and used an X instead. The rails came in from the front corners, crossed in the middle under the drive shaft, and swept back out to the rear. Chevrolet called it the safety girder frame and claimed about 30% more rigidity than the year before. The perimeter frame, the one most people picture when they think of an old American chassis, came later. General Motors put it under its full-size cars in 1965 as the design that replaced the X. The order those two arrived in gets reversed constantly, including by people who ought to know better. What the X bought was the loss of height. With no rails running down the sides past the passengers' feet, the floor pan could drop into the space they used to occupy, and the whole 1958 Chevrolet line came down close to 4 inches without anybody losing headroom. The car grew at the same time, out to about 209 inches long. The bill arrived in the middle of the cabin, where the transmission tunnel is tall enough that whoever draws the short straw rides with their knees up. The rest of the car was new along with it. Coil springs went in at all 4 corners, with a 3-link arrangement holding the rear axle. There were 4 headlights across the nose for the first time on a Chevrolet. The Impala got a rear roof pillar that leaned the wrong way, forward instead of back, and no other Chevrolet in the range wore that roof. Inside, the Impala got aluminum trim on the door panels and striped upholstery. Outside, there was a chrome spear ahead of each rear wheel that collectors have called the pitchfork ever since, and a 2-spoke steering wheel drilled with holes that the same crowd calls the Swiss cheese wheel. On the roof, behind the back window, sat a pair of scoops that looked like air extractors. They never were. The roof vents were decoration from the first drawing, a Q usually traced to Mercedes and stamped into steel, and General Motors went on, selling the look of engineering that way for another decade. The option that almost none of them still have was called level air. For about $125, a buyer could have air springs in place of steel ones, fed by a compressor and managed by self-leveling valves. With 4 adults aboard and a trunk full of luggage, the car still sat level, which a steel spring cannot do at all. General Motors engineers thought enough of it to write the system up for the Society of Automotive Engineers. It was also fragile. A buyer who paid the extra was often back at the dealer inside a year or two, having coil springs put under the car instead. Some owners did the job themselves later on, once the parts got hard to find. There was no recall and no refund program in anything that survives on paper. The option simply stopped being ordered, and an intact original level air car is a rare thing now, and a coil spring conversion is what almost all of them are wearing. Under the hood, the base engine was the 235 cubic inch Blue Flame 6, and most Impala buyers walked straight past it. What they took instead was the 283 V8, in versions running from mild up to a ramjet fuel-injected setup that got close to 250 horsepower. The new one that year was the 348 Chevrolet's first big block, sold as turbo thrust. It had been developed with trucks in mind as much as cars, which is an argument that still runs in the hobby. On a 4-barrel carburetor, it made around 250 horsepower, and the hottest version advertised that season, with solid lifters and high compression, was quoted at 315. That engine is the direct ancestor of the 409, which arrived in 1961 and got itself onto a Beach Boys record the year after. A manual gearbox was standard equipment. Most of the buyers who wanted an automatic took Power Glide, the 2-speed with a reputation for surviving abuse that it has never lost. The interesting one cost about $50 more and was called Turbo Glide. Turbo Glide had a 5-element torque converter with a variable pitch stator and no stepped shifts at all. It did not change gear. It changed ratio continuously, from a standstill all the way to cruising speed which is what a modern continuously variable transmission does, 25 years early. Chevrolet had built the thing the industry would arrive at a quarter of a century later, and its customers did not want it. A man pulling away from a light in 1958 expected to feel the car change gear underneath him and hear the note drop when it did. Turboglide gave him neither, and most of the people shopping for an automatic ordered the 2-speed instead. It ran hot behind the big block, in an aluminum case that shed heat poorly, and it earned a reputation for failing in reverse. Chevrolet kept it through the 1961 model year and dropped it for 1962. The gearbox argument died with the gearbox. The one about the frame under it has been running for 60 years. An X has no outer side rails, so between the door skin and the person sitting behind it, there is a rocker panel and not a great deal else. A run of well-publicized crashes and lawsuits gave the design a lasting reputation for poor side impact protection. General Motors' own engineering handbook for 1958 says the rocker panels, the cowl and the body cross members were reinforced specifically so that body and frame, in its words, supplement each other to create an effective integrated combination. That is an engineering answer rather than an advertising line. In Evans versus General Motors, the case everybody cites, the court never ruled on whether the frame was safe. One detailed teardown of the design published since argues the side impact case is largely folklore. Nobody has ever produced the finding that would end it either way. All of that went into a car which arrived on the showroom floor as the most expensive Chevrolet available, because the convertible cost more than anything else the division sold in 1958. It went on sale into the worst year the American car business had seen since the war. Dealers had the new cars in the last days of October 1957. Weeks earlier, the Soviet Union had put Sputnik into orbit, and the newspapers lying on the showroom counters were still full of it. General Motors, meanwhile, had been throwing itself a party since that same month. 1958 was the company's 50th year, and it bought 2 hours of NBC in November. Close to half the television audience in the country watched it. Chevrolet and Pontiac both offered a special anniversary gold paint. Only Pontiac made a badge of it, on a little over 1,000 Gold Star Chief sedans. The economy did not join in. Unemployment had been near 4% in 1957. By the July after it went on sale, it was 7.5%, and the industry sold about 1/3 fewer cars than the year before, the worst year the business had had since the war. The people who did come through the door were buying differently. Ramblers and small imported cars were the only things gaining ground that year, and the man Ed Cole was chasing up the ladder had just been handed a good reason to stay where he was. The Sport Coupe started at about $2,586 and the convertible at about $2,700, which made it the most expensive car in Chevrolet's range. The median American family that year earned around $5,100. The man standing in front of a convertible in the last week of October was looking at better than half of everything his household would earn in the year ahead. The badge on the hood belonged to a company that had spent 3 decades telling him it was the cheap one. Ford's answer to the same problem was already in trouble. The Edsel had arrived with its own dealers and its own advertising into a market that had stopped buying, aimed at a customer who turned out not to be standing where Ford had thought. Chevrolet moved somewhere around 180,000 Impalas that year. Just under 56,000 of them were convertibles. And that convertible was the only full-size soft-top Chevrolet built for 1958. Every Impala was a Bel Air underneath, with a different roof on it and 6 lights across the back. Selling them cost Chevrolet a fresh badge and a page in the brochure, handed to the dealers it already had. Total Chevrolet production dropped to roughly 1.2 million cars, well down on the year before. It was still enough to beat Ford and take back the #1 position in the country. The car had done its job. It pulled the buyer Chevrolet was losing back into a Chevrolet showroom in a year when almost nobody was buying anything, wearing a body that had been condemned before anybody outside General Motors laid eyes on it. The 1959 cars were already being tooled, and the decision that produced them had been taken on one afternoon in a design studio in the summer of 1956. Harley Earl got back from Europe and went to see what his studios had been doing while he was away. The 1959 program that had been on the walls when he left was gone. In its place was the work Mitchell's designers had started the afternoon they came back from the fence. Earl walked through the studios, looked at all of it, and left without saying anything. Within a few days, the word came back down that he was behind it. The most powerful man in American car design had come home to find that his staff had thrown out his own program while he was abroad, and he let them keep it. The renegade 1959 cars became the real 1959 cars, and the bodies already being tooled for 1958 became a one-year stopgap that Chevrolet had to build and sell regardless. Getting an entire new range drawn, tooled, and into production that fast cost money, and the way General Motors found it is the part every account of the 1959 cars turns on. All 5 car divisions went onto one basic body shell for 1959. Chevrolet, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Buick, and Cadillac shared the structure underneath and did their arguing on the surface. The Chevrolet surface is the one people still talk about. It spread its fins sideways across the back of the car, flat and wide, over the teardrop lights the trade called cat's eyes. They were drawn so deep that the presses could not stamp a rear quarter panel in one piece. Each side took 2 stampings welded together, with the seam hidden under a strip of bright trim. Underneath sat the same X-frame Chevrolet had introduced 12 months earlier. The 1958 Chevrolet was not the only body killed by that afternoon in the studio. Pontiac's 1958 body lasted 1 model year for exactly the same reason. Detroit did not normally throw away a body after 12 months. And in 1958, General Motors did it twice. People remember the Chevrolet because it carried the Impala. The Impala came out of the wreckage promoted. For 1959, it stopped being the top trim of the Bel Air series and became a series of its own, and it went straight to the top of Chevrolet's sales charts. Bel Air, the name it had spent a year sitting underneath, was pushed down the range below it. Chevrolet built 72,765 Impala convertibles for 1959 against just under 56,000 the year before. Earl had weeks left by then. General Motors retired its people at 65, and Earl turned 65 on the 22nd of November, 1958, a few weeks after the 1959 cars reached showrooms. Bill Mitchell formally took the chair on the 1st of December. The design staff built Earl a roadster of his own as a leaving present, which is a particular way for a styling department to say goodbye to a man. He moved down to West Palm Beach and died in April of 1969. There was a bill for the low bodies, and it was paid by the people sitting in them. The seats had to come down to keep headroom under the dropped roof, and the seating position in the full-size General Motors cars of 1959 and 1960 was among the lowest of any American full-size car. Customers said so, and from 1961, General Motors started raising the seats again. Losing the body turned out to be the best thing that happened to the name. And the body itself, the one that only got 12 months, went on to a second life nobody in the Chevrolet studio had drawn it for. The taillights outlived the body first. There were 3 per side, 6 across the back, and no other Chevrolet in 1958 had them. Chevrolet kept returning to that arrangement for decades, on cars with nothing else in common with the Impala. The front-wheel drive Lumina of the early 90s had 6 lights across the back of it, and so did the Celebrity it replaced. The frame had the longer afterlife, and nobody at General Motors drew it for what it ended up doing. On the 1st of January, 1958, Section 24,008 of the California Vehicle Code came into force, making it illegal to drive a car sitting lower than the bottom of its wheel rims. It landed on the people lowering cars in Southern California 9 weeks after the first Impalas reached dealers, and the Chevrolet those people were about to find had no side rails in its frame and a floor lower than anything before it. Ron Aguirre in Rialto answered the law with aircraft parts. He fitted surplus aircraft hydraulic pumps to his custom Corvette. When a patrol car came into view, he could lift the whole thing off its stops from the driver's seat, at a switch, and drop it again once the officer had gone. That installation is where every account of the hydraulic lowrider starts. The reason so many of them are Impalas is the frame. There are no rails down the sides of an X, so the floor sits low, and there is space underneath for a body to go lower than it was ever meant to go. The cars that became the icons came 3 and 4 model years later. Doughboy drives a 1963 in Boys and the Hood, and Eazy-E's 6.4 is a 1964. The 58 body is what made the platform work, and the cars that came 3 and 4 model years later are the ones that ended up in the songs. American Graffiti reached cinemas in 1973 with a white 1958 Impala parked in the middle of it. The car belongs to Steve Bolander, who hands the keys to Terry the Toad for one night and spends the rest of the film regretting it. The car they filmed ran a 4-barrel 348 and a 3-speed manual gearbox, and Ray Evernham later took on the restoration of the original. A 1958 Impala now averages somewhere around $93,000 when one changes hands, and the good ones go past $100,000. A convertible with the big block and 3 2-barrel carburetors on top of it starts at about $120,000 and runs up towards $230,000. Chevrolet ran 3 different bodies across 1957, 1958, and 1959, and the middle one shared not a single panel with either of its neighbors. It sold well in a year when nothing sold well, and it put Chevrolet back on top of the American market on its way out the door. The decision to scrap it had been taken while it was still clay, by men who had looked through a fence and could not unsee what was on the other side. If you were out looking at old cars like this one, the ebook linked in the description goes through what to check before you hand anybody money. It covers the rot that hides where you would not think to look, and the paperwork that tells you where a car has been.